In 1968, a Soviet nuclear submarine vanished in the Pacific without a trace. While the USSR gave it up for lost, the CIA already knew where it was and was planning the most audacious heist in history. The cover? An eccentric millionaire looking for minerals. The reality? A giant mechanical claw designed to extract atomic secrets from the abyssal darkness. Get ready to discover Project Azorian, the mission that surpassed fiction. If you are passionate about hidden history, smash the like button, subscribe, and join us to the depths. March 1968. The world was on edge, balancing precariously on the tightrope of the Cold War. On the surface, the politics of détente tried to smooth out the rough edges between Washington and Moscow. But beneath the waves, in the unfathomable darkness of the oceans, a silent and lethal war was being fought. It was on this stage of global paranoia where the K-129, a Soviet Gulf II-class submarine, disappeared without a trace. There was no distress call, no visible oil slick, nor floating debris to indicate its whereabouts. The K-129, loaded with 3 SSN-4 nuclear ballistic missiles and a crew of nearly 100 men, simply vanished into the vast Pacific northwest of Hawaii. For the Soviet High Command, the radio silence was the prelude to a nightmare. The USSR Pacific Fleet panicked. Dozens of ships and planes were deployed in a frantic search that lasted 2 months. They swept the ocean, listened on all frequencies, but the sea had swallowed its secret. Finally, defeated by the ocean's immensity, the Soviets declared the submarine and its crew lost at sea. But where the Soviets saw a void, the Americans saw an opportunity. Thanks to a secret network of acoustic sensors and Air Force technology, the United States had heard what the Russians could not: the final implosion of the K-129. They knew where it was, and more importantly, the first images taken by the spy submarine USS Halibut revealed something that changed the history of modern espionage. The K-129 was not in scattered pieces. It lay at 16,500 feet deep, about 5,000 meters, relatively intact, waiting in the eternal silence. Those final images of the shipwreck were the catalyst for the most audacious, expensive, and technically complex intelligence operation of the 20th century. It was not just about locating a shipwreck, it was about stealing it. Thus, Project Azorian was born. The premise that its final images change everything is not a literary exaggeration. It is the technical reality that fueled the project. When the USS Halibut lowered its cameras into the abyssal trench, what CIA analysts saw defied all logic. At that depth, the pressure is crushing, capable of reducing steel to crumpled aluminum foil. An unrecognizable debris field was expected. Instead, the ghostly photographs showed the K-129's hull, resting on the seabed as if sleeping. This finding in itself was the first victory of Azorian. A team of naval and metallurgical experts dedicated months to analyzing the Halibut photos. Every seam, every dent in the hull, was studied to understand the exact point of fracture. It was theorized that the stern section had separated, but the forward third, the most important for intelligence, as it contained the control room and encryption equipment, was surprisingly well preserved. For the CIA, and specifically for its Science and Technology Division, this presented an irresistible treasure. It was not just about recovering the cryptographic codebooks or the nuclear warheads, although that was already worth its weight in gold, but something deeper: reverse engineering. Vince Houghton, curator of the International Spy Museum, explains that the real prize was understanding the Soviet manufacturing process. How did their sonars work? What mechanisms did they use to silence their engines? If the United States could understand how Soviet submarines were built, it could perfect its ability to detect and destroy them. In an era of virtual nuclear parity, where both superpowers had enough weapons to end the world, any advantage, however minimal, was vital. The value of operational intelligence was incalculable, but the risk of military escalation was too. The CIA knew that if Moscow found out about the theft, the world would move dangerously closer to World War III. Therefore, the need for absolute secrecy and an impenetrable alibi became the highest priority, even above technical feasibility. A security protocol was established so strict that only a handful of people, including the CIA director and the President of the United States, knew the true objective. However, desire clashed with physical reality. No one in the history of humanity had lifted a 2,000-ton object from 3 miles deep. The depth was such that Mount Fuji could have been completely hidden underwater, and there would still be thousands of feet left to the surface. Engineers faced a problem that seemed impossible. The CIA considered ideas bordering on science fiction, such as generating gas at the ocean floor to float the submarine. But finally, they settled on a solution that resembled a fairground arcade game: a giant claw. The technical solution was as absurd as it was brilliant. A giant ship would be built with a moon pool in its center, an opening in the hull that allowed access to the sea from inside the ship. It was an unprecedented engineering feat. A floating hangar invisible from the air, designed to swallow the evidence of the crime without a trace. From there, a steel pipe would be lowered, section by section, until reaching the bottom. At the end of that pipe would hang an immense mechanical claw, affectionately named Clementine, or formally as the capture vehicle. This claw would embrace the Russian submarine and slowly lift it into the ship's belly, concealing it from the view of Soviet satellites and spy ships. But building a 618-foot, 188-meter long vessel with a massive drilling tower is not something that can be done in secret. They needed a cover, a lie so big and public that no one would bother to question it. This is where the most enigmatic figure of the time comes into play: Howard Hughes. The reclusive billionaire, famous for his eccentricities and his aviation empire, was the perfect partner for the CIA. Hughes already had a reputation for doing strange and grandiose things. The CIA invented a story. Howard Hughes was going into the deep-sea mining business. The stated objective was to collect manganese nodules, mineral formations that cover the ocean floor. It was the perfect excuse. It justified the heavy machinery, the remote Pacific location, and the paranoid secrecy typical of a company protecting its commercial technology. Under this facade, the Hughes Glomar Explorer was built. In 1972, the ship was christened with champagne and fake press releases. The Los Angeles Times, swallowing the bait, described the ship as shrouded in secrecy, attributing the lack of information to Hughes's known aversion to publicity. No one suspected that, while the world watched the eccentric millionaire, the CIA was building the largest heisting machine in history. The logistics of Project Azorian were titanic. While the Glomar Explorer was being built on the east coast of the United States, the Clementine claw was secretly manufactured inside a giant submersible barge, the HMB-1, in Redwood City, California. The claw was an engineering marvel, designed with hydraulic arms capable of adjusting to the submarine's hull and lifting millions of pounds. The meeting between the ship and the claw was an industrial ballet operation. The Glomar Explorer traveled around South America. It was too wide for the Panama Canal, to the coast of California. There, in a clandestine maneuver near Catalina Island, the HMB-1 barge submerged. The Glomar positioned itself above it, opened the hatches of its moon pool, and swallowed the claw, without anyone being able to see it from the outside. By the summer of 1974, with the final approval of President Richard Nixon, everything was ready. The Cold War had entered a phase of détente, easing of tensions, but distrust remained absolute. The Glomar explorer set sail for the exact spot where the K-129 rested. The mission, which had already cost hundreds of millions of dollars, modern estimates suggest the total cost was around $800 million of the time, an astronomical figure, was about to face its trial by fire. Before Clementine's claw descends into total darkness, let's take a technical pause. Stories like Project Azorian require weeks of research to surface. If you are enjoying this trip into the deepest secrets of the Cold War, secure your subscription right now and give a strong like to the video. Your support is the fuel that allows us to continue declassifying these files. Ready? Now, let's return to 5,000 meters deep. Reaching the site was just the beginning. Maintaining a ship of that size perfectly static over a point on the ocean floor 3 miles away, while waves and currents hit the hull, required dynamic positioning technology that was light years ahead of its time. The tension on board was palpable. They were not alone. 2 Soviet ships, probably loaded with intelligence agents, approached the Glomar explorer. The Russians were suspicious, but the manganese mining alibi was solid. They saw the Americans working, lowering pipes, seemingly searching for minerals. In a moment of tension, almost comical, the crew of the Glomar had to stack boxes on the landing deck to prevent the Soviets from trying to land a helicopter. The crew lived with their hearts in their throats, fearing that a simple creak of the cables would betray the operation to the Russian sonars that were attentively listening to every movement from the nearby ships. While a game of cat and mouse was being played above, below, in perpetual darkness, the claw slowly descended. Pipe after pipe, 60-foot section after 60-foot section. The descent took days. Finally, Clementine reached the bottom. Operators, guided by cameras and sonars, maneuvered the claw over the K-129. The steel arms closed. The grip was firm. The ascent began. For days, the hydraulic system groaned under the strain of lifting the Soviet submarine. Meter by meter, the K-129 approached the surface. The engineers held their breath. They were achieving the impossible. They had lifted the submarine almost halfway, thousands of meters above the seabed. And then, disaster struck. According to declassified reports and the book Project Azorian, the CIA, and the raising of the K-129, a critical mechanical failure struck the operation. Several of the claw's grappling arms, made of miraging steel, extremely strong but not very ductile, broke under the tension. The Glomar crew watched in horror on video screens as the submarine broke apart. 2/3 of the K-129 slipped from the claw and fell back toward the abyss, taking with it the code room, most of the missiles, and many of the secrets they so desperately craved. Only the bow section, approximately 1/3 of the submarine, remained trapped in the claw. Despite the catastrophic failure, the mission was not a total failure. The Glomar explorer finished raising the recovered section and brought it into the moon pool. There, away from Soviet eyes, CIA and naval intelligence teams began to dissect what they had fished. What did they find? The CIA, true to its nature, has kept many of the details secret until today. Vince Houghton suggests being skeptical of the total failure narrative. It is convenient for the CIA, for the world, to believe they did not get anything important. "We have no idea what they got," says Houghton. It is known that they recovered 2 torpedoes with nuclear warheads, some manuals, and sonar equipment. But perhaps The most shocking finding was not technological, but human. Inside the twisted remains of the bow section, they found the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors. This is where the story takes a solemn turn that elevates it above a simple spy movie. Instead of treating the bodies as refuse or evidence, the CIA gave them a full military funeral. They organized a ceremony on deck, with honors, prayers in Russian and English, and buried the bodies at sea with the dignity they deserved as sailors. A gesture of honor between warriors that transcended ideological borders and demonstrated unexpected respect in times of hatred. This act was filmed, and these are, perhaps, the true final images that change the perspective of history. In middle of a brutal ideological war, mortal enemies paid homage to the fallen of the other side. Decades later, in 1992, CIA Director Robert Gates handed that videotape to Russian President Boris Yeltsin as a gesture of goodwill. It was the final proof for the families of those sailors that their sons had not deserted or disappeared in vain, but had died in service. The original plan included a second mission, Project Matador, to return and recover the rest of the submarine. But the secret did not last. In 1975, a strange burglary at Howard Hughes' Summa Corporation offices exposed documents linking the magnate to the CIA and the submarine project. The story was too juicy to be kept hidden. New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh already had clues since 1973, but had agreed to the request of CIA Director William Colby not to publish anything for national security. However, in February 1975, the Los Angeles Times broke the embargo and published the story. Soon, the news was on all national newscasts. The public exposure killed any possibility of returning for the rest of the K-129. The White House found itself in a terrible diplomatic dilemma. If they admitted they had stolen a Soviet submarine, the URSS would be forced to respond, perhaps violently, to save face. If they blatantly lied, they would lose credibility. The solution was a masterpiece of legal bureaucracy that we still use today. When journalists requested information under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, the CIA responded with a phrase that has become legendary: "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the requested materials." This phrase, known today as the Glomar Response, allowed the U.S. government to walk the diplomatic tightrope, avoiding an open war without having to reveal its secrets. 50 years later, Project Azorian stands as a monument to the unbridled ambition of the Cold War. Was it a success? Technically, they failed to recover the entire objective. They spent the equivalent of thousands of millions of dollars current to recover only 1/3 of a ship and a few torpedoes. However, as Houghton points out, the mission is legendary within the intelligence community. It proved that the United States could do the impossible. They could reach any point on the planet, regardless of depth, and take what they wanted right under the enemy's nose. The mere existence of the Glomar Explorer and the Clementine Claw forced the Soviets to rethink all their naval security, spending precious resources on countermeasures. The legacy of Project Azorian is not only in the recovered intelligence manuals or in the ocean mining engineering they pioneered, and which ironically did advance the real mining industry. In fact, much of modern deep-sea drilling technology was born here. Today's oil rigs owe their stability to the systems invented for this heist. Its legacy resides in the audacity of the premise: locating a needle in an ocean-sized haystack and building a giant hand to pull it out. The final images of the K-129, first as a ghost on sonar, then as a steel corpse breaking in the claw, and finally as the scenario of a solemn funeral, remind us that the Cold War was not just a political chess game. Leave me your theory in the comments. Do not forget to share this video and activate the bell so you do not miss our next declassified file. See you in the next one.